Hello, everyone. I'm happy to welcome you at the second webinar from the Luxoft Technology series. My name is Evgenia Stushkova. I'm a marketing manager at Luxoft, and I'm happy to welcome all of you at this webinar dedicated to Disciplined Agile Development by Scott Ambler. Before we start, I would like to lead you briefly through the logistics of this project. So basically, here is the Q&A session options that will start in the end of the presentation from the speaker. You can send your questions in the Q&A box or via Twitter using @Luxoft or LTS hashtag. If you have some organizational questions, if you have some problems with the sound, please feel free to send them in the chat of this webinar. I also wanted to indicate that 5 best questions that will be selected by the speaker and the authors of these questions will receive his latest book on Disciplined Agile Delivery. So, your questions are very welcome. And now I would like to present our speaker. Today, Scott Ambler, software engineer, consultant, and author of numerous books, will present you the webinar on Disciplined Agile Delivery. So now the word goes to the speaker.
Okay, thank you very much. Hi, everybody. I'm just going to start sharing my screen in a second. Okay, so hopefully you can see my screen. If somebody could just let me say yes, that would be great.
No, unfortunately, we do not see it at the moment.
Oh, okay, hang on. Let me try this again.
Yes, now
you can see it.
Exactly.
Okay, let me go to full screen here. Always harder than it should be. Okay, anyways, so let me go back a slide here. Sorry. Okay, so what I would like to talk about today is some work that I've been doing called Disciplined Agile Delivery. And Disciplined Agile Delivery is a decision process framework. We're going to go through the details of it in a bit. But the basic idea is that it helps you to understand the process-oriented decisions that you're making and the organizational-oriented decisions that you're making in it. But anyways, we'll take you through that in a minute. So the history of it is it came about from my work when I was at IBM, and my job I was customer-facing, and I was the chief methodologist for IT at IBM National for 6 years, and my job was to go around the world helping organizations to understand and to be effective at agile software development and with lean software development, often at scale. So I was taking on some very difficult problems. And what happened was the organizations that were successful, what happened was we started seeing patterns. And we started seeing that the successful organizations were doing the same basic things. And it wasn't what many people in the industry were talking about, which was strange. So anyways, this is how this Disciplined Agile Delivery came about, was it's this from empirical observations of what was actually working out there in enterprises. So anyways, what I want to do here today is get you thinking outside the box. So if you're new to Agile, this will definitely be a bit strange to you. But even if you are familiar with, say, Scrum or Kanban or some of the other methodologies, I think you're going to see that Dad takes it one step further, and it's this next generation of approach. So having said that, though, I want to give you a warning. I am going to cover a lot of ideas. I'm going to cover a lot of ground in the next hour. So just be aware that it could be a bit overwhelming, but because this is an interesting but complicated topic. So I'm going to talk about a few things. And first of all, I'm going to give you a brief overview of what DAD is all about. Then I'll walk you through how it's a hybrid and the various life cycles that we support. I think the life cycle concept is absolutely critical. We're definitely going one step further than what we're seeing in the Scrum and Kanban community. I'll also talk about what it means to scale. And one of the arguments I'm going to make today is that Disciplined Agile Delivery provides the foundation from which you scale. And I think some organizations are trying to scale Agile right now, and they're really sort of suffering. And the reason why is because they don't have this solid foundation in place. They're basing their scaling approach on partial methods like Scrum, and they're really getting into trouble as a result. So, anyways, I'll walk you through what that means, and then finally I'll talk a little bit about how DAD is goal driven. It's not prescriptive at all. An interesting thing about some of the other Agile methods, even though they claim to not be prescriptive, they're actually quite prescriptive. And I'll walk you through why that's the case, and I'll show you a more mature, more robust approach to Agile software development. And then finally, I'll end off with a discussion of why this really is all about discipline, and how DAD goes beyond the normal discipline that we see in the Agile world. So, anyways, what's Disciplined Agile Delivery? There's several key characteristics of it. It has many of the normal Agile and Lean strategies. So it's people oriented. It's people first. If you don't have, you need a good team that works together well. Otherwise, you'll find yourself in fairly big trouble. It's learning oriented. Very very similar to the ideas coming out of the Lean community. But it's also solution focused. So we go beyond the rhetoric around just software. So a lot of people will talk about potentially shippable software and how software is the primary measure of progress, and that's just not true. It's what's really going on here is yes, software is part of it, but it runs on hardware, and we're also we're often changing the business process around the usage of the solution. We're often changing the organization structure. There's documentation involved, so it's really more solution that we should be looking at, not just software. So we need to up our game. We need to be a little more mature, and we need to observe what's really going on. So some of this bias towards software in the Agile community is it's useful, but it's not. It doesn't get the job done in enterprises. We need to be a little more sophisticated than that. I talk about the importance of enterprise awareness. This is a fairly new concept, and calls into question some of the philosophies in the Agile community. Actually, the Agile stuff, most Agile stuff is team oriented, which is great, but we need to go beyond that. We need to look at the bigger picture. So, anyways, let's take a look at some of these ideas. So first of all, DAD is a hybrid. We take ideas from a wide range of sources. Some of them that you're probably familiar with, like Scrum and Kanban. But some of the more radical sources, like unified process. A lot of people in the Agile community like to beat up on the unified process, but there is there's a lot of really great ideas there that we can leverage and take advantage of. So, and it's interesting, if you step back and take a look at some of the things going on in the Agile community right now, they're basically reinventing portions of the unified process. It's really sort of interesting to watch this generation of people, relearn what the previous generation had also invested time in learning, and as well as Agile Modeling, Agile data, DevOps. DevOps stuff is baked right into DAD. You don't have to figure it out. There's a few ideas from SAFe. There's a bit of a backlash against SAFe right now, but the reality is that there are some good ideas there, some questionable ideas as well, but we can, keep the good ideas and get rid of the not so good ideas, I think. Excuse me. So anyways, and one way to think of DAD is that it's the glue that fits all these things together. One of the challenges, I think, with these methodologies is they're all sort of piecemeal. Scrum is very good at certain things. Extreme programming is good at certain things. Agile modeling is good at certain things. But nobody really has the bigger picture, and they all sort of leave it to you to figure it out how everything fits together. Well, it does make a lot of sense to do that. Like that's phenomenally wasteful when you take a look at it from an industry point of view. So, Disciplined Agile Delivery has actually done some of the heavy lifting for you, and it's figured out how these good things fit together. So, I think there's something to be said for this. So, anyways, we'll see some of the implications of this when we get into the goal-driven aspects of that. One of the ideas that we promote in Disciplined Agile Delivery is the fact that we should really be looking at the delivery lifecycle, not just the construction lifecycle. I'll go into details about what this means in a minute, but one of the one of the interesting things about Disciplined Agile Delivery is that it calls it a full delivery life cycle. So it explicitly calls out an inception or a startup phase where in Scrum, they sometimes call this sprint zero, calls out construction. Well, that's not exactly, that's not new, but it also calls out transition or, a release phase or a deployment phase, whatever you want to call that. And we make it clear how all this stuff fits together. So we're trying to take some of the mystery out of Agile. We're trying to, make it clear, here's how things actually fit together. Here's how it all works together. And one thing, one aspect of that is to be clear and honest about how we actually work together. So the average Agile team spends about a little over a month doing inception. The average Agile team has 2-week-long iterations. So anybody tells you that it's only a sprint, they're not really, that inception or startup is only a sprint. It's not exactly accurate. You can empirically notice that inception, starting up, takes a little bit longer than the average sprint length or the average iteration length, whatever terminology you want to use. And same thing for transition. The average Agile team spends about a month in transition. So because it's hard, it takes time. Now, yes, you'll see some teams will turn through continuous delivery type practices. They'll take some they'll turn transition into activity. I'll talk about that in a minute. But the fact is the average team spends a little over a month doing release. So let's respect that. Let's observe that, and let's be clear. But this is what's actually happening. So, like I said, let's take some of the mystery about how this stuff works and actually provide an accurate and honest picture of the way teams actually work, as opposed to some of the rhetorical or fantasy type things that we actually see that people actually claim. So I'm sure you're all familiar with the Scrum lifecycle. There's some great ideas here, but it's pretty obvious this is only a good start. It focuses on construction. It has nothing to say about how you start up, how you do transitions. There's some very clearly and obviously some missing aspects of Agile here. So it's a good start, but we can do better. So if we're even to be remotely honest about how teams work, we would explicitly include the fact that we do some initial modeling up front and some initial planning up front. We would explicitly include the fact that we have to release some production every so often. So let's just do it. Let's just be clear, be honest, communicate what's actually happening here. We can also take some of the marketing rhetoric out of the life cycle. So you can use whatever terminology you want. The terminology doesn't really matter all that much, but it's not a Scrum meeting; it's a coordination meeting. It's not a sprint. Really, that's a weird term. That doesn't make any sense. Nobody sprints for a race. So let's try to be accurate. So let's use some of the terminology that's actually a little more obvious. Take some of the mystery out of it again, and as well, let's get rid of some of the marketing. We don't really do. We need to be marketed at. I think we're professionals. We can do without the marketing these days. And the reality is too, there's more to it than just construction. So yes, developers love to talk about programming and testing and all that good sort of stuff, but our teams are governed. So somebody's keeping an eye on the money. Somebody is keeping an eye on how the work that my team does fits into the overall enterprise. Somebody's keeping an eye on whether or not we're working together effectively. So this is called governance. Now, and there's more to governance than just this, of course, but in most organizations, first, I want to make a couple of observations. First, your teams are being governed. You might not be aware of it, but senior management does in fact do something. So somebody is making these decisions, and there's different ways of doing it, and all that good sort of stuff. But it is happening. The second point I want to make is in most organizations, governance is a bit of a disaster. This is one of the reasons why we're always saying, senior management doesn't know what they're doing, and all that good sort of stuff, I guess. But the reality is that senior managers, they're smart people. They're doing the best that they can. They just need some help in understanding how to govern Agile teams. So in Disciplined Agile Delivery, we provide this advice. We make it clear. So these lightweight milestones. Some of them are actually straight out of Scrum. We're just making them explicit. Other ones are straight out of the Unified process. So we have these lightweight milestones that where we can have coherent checkpoints, and it's risk-based. So we have a few milestones early in the project that come into us as a common stakeholder vision, proving the architecture works with working code, things like this. So things that drive down the risk in your projects and thereby increase project success. So we can be a little bit smarter. Effective governance actually helps you to get your job done. So anyway, so there's some. So Disciplined Agile teams should be guided by senior management and it should happen effectively. So, and my experience is if you don't give senior management a strategy for governing agile teams, then they'll usually fall back on older traditional waterfall ways of working, and that will not be very good for you. So as professionals, we need to step up and we need to help senior management understand what the heck is going on here and actually help them to help us. So there's a strong governance strategy. It's still lightweight, still very easy and simple to do. So let's be governed effectively. Another observation is that teams don't work in a vacuum. There's this larger overall ecosystem. So, we might have, in most enterprises, they might have an enterprise architecture effort underway. They might have a business strategy. They might have a technology strategy to follow. They might have standards and guidelines. There'll be an operations group, a support group. There'll be a portfolio management group or a PMO office. And these groups of people, you need to interact with them. You need to, their job is to actually help you. Now, it doesn't always seem that way, but really they should be. So one of the aspects of being a little more robust, a little more mature, is to understand that your team is just one of many teams in your organization, and what you do has to reflect the overall goals of the enterprise, and it should help others, and they should help you. So we need to look beyond the team to something called enterprise awareness. Oh, I apologize for the cough. It's just turning to winter here in Canada, so I've got my initial fall cold, I guess. Anyways, another aspect of Disciplined Agile Delivery is that it's not prescriptive. So even though I've been describing a Scrum-based life cycle so far, the reality is that there's different teams will be following different life cycles. So here's an example of a lean version of a life cycle, more of a Kanban-ish type of thing, where you do a continuous stream of development. Have these things. So there's different ways that you can prioritize the work. In Kanban, it's very clear that you pull work in as you have the ability to or the capacity to do it, and that there's different ways you can prioritize it. So their work prioritization or requirements prioritization strategy, whatever you want to call that, is a little more sophisticated than what we see in Scrum. So the point is that DAD does not prescribe a single life cycle. It does not prescribe how it gives you choices. It doesn't prescribe single ways of doing things. So, and we'll see this a little bit better when we hit the goal-driven stuff. One interesting observation is that the phases tend to disappear over time. So even though the average Agile team has roughly a month of startup and roughly a month of transition or delivery, those phases, if you keep your team together, those phases will shrink over time. Inception starts to shrink really quickly, actually, because in the second release, well, you know what the architecture is, the team is already together. You probably know what the scope of the next release is because it's whatever you didn't get built. So it's pretty easy to do inception. Now transition, that's a little bit more difficult to shorten. So with all the continuous delivery and continuous development stuff, it's all about. But you need to automate all your tests. You need to automate your deployment. You need to be smarter about the way you decide whether or not you're production ready. So it's all about increasing quality and increasing visibility and better decision making. But over time, transition, both inception and transition can actually turn into activities and not just phases. So many organizations now have deployment or transition efforts on the order of minutes or hours, not weeks or months. So, and they do this through automation and all the other things I was talking about earlier. In Disciplined Agile Delivery, so what happens is once the phases start to disappear, at least the lean version of the life cycle would look like this. So this is a lean continuous delivery life cycle. So once again, the point is that we support multiple life cycles because different teams are working in different ways in different situations, and there are different points in the learning life cycle. So for example, so I've seen teams, they'll start out with something like Scrum, the Scrum-based life cycle that I showed. They'll evolve into that more of a Kanban type of a life cycle, and eventually evolve into more of this continuous delivery type of life cycle. So, and this is all through learning and process improvement and stuff like this. So, anyways, I would invite you to question any methodology that promotes a single life cycle, because I think it's pretty easy to observe in most organizations, we have different teams following different life cycles. So let's just make this explicit and help the teams choose the life cycle that's right for them. So anyways, this is a interesting way of looking at things, I hope. So what does it mean to scale Agile delivery? So there's actually two aspects of scaling. One aspect of scaling, which is what we say SAFe addresses, is how do you scale Agile to go across the entire IT organization? So there's ways to address portfolio management and release management in SAFe that are interesting. Another aspect of scaling out is how do you scale Agile delivery teams to address more complex situations, and what would those complexities be? So, anyways, obviously team size is one issue. So Agile is being successfully done with teams of as small as 2 people, all the way up to teams or programs of hundreds of people. We're also seeing Agile being successfully applied and not so successfully applied sometimes when teams are co-located, so everybody's in the same room, when teams are spread across the same building, spread across the same city, or even spread across the planet. So there are reports. I've actually been on globally distributed Agile teams that have been quite successful. So it is possible. So don't let anybody tell you different. But you will work differently. Obviously, a team that's globally distributed will work very differently than a team where everybody's co-located in the same room. Sometimes you're organizationally distributed, so it's pretty easy when everybody works for a single division of a single company. A little more difficult when multiple divisions are involved because you start getting politics and all that good sort of stuff. A little harder when you've got contractors or consultants involved. Harder yet when you're doing outsourcing. So so obviously a team that's where some of it's outsourced will work differently than a team where everybody's working for a single company. So we need to observe this and then decide how the heck is it that we're going to tailor our process. Sometimes we have regulatory compliance. It could be many teams have no regulatory compliance at all. Some have financial regulatory compliance like Sarbanes-Oxley or Agle 2. Other teams have life critical compliances like the FDA regulations in the United States. So where maybe you're building a heart monitor or you're building this supporting software for a pharmaceutical drug. So anyways, and I've worked in both those situations, by the way. There is software involved with drug development if you've never been involved. Sometimes there's domain complexity. It can be something very straightforward, like you're working on a website, something a little more complicated, like an e-commerce system or a financial processing system, or something very complex, like an air traffic control system or the software for a satellite. So anyways, there's different ranges of complexity. So obviously a company that's building the software to run a nuclear power plant perhaps is going to work in a slightly more sophisticated manner than a team that is working on a website. So I think that's an obvious thing, I hope. And then finally, with technical complexity, it's pretty easy when you're using brand new technologies, you're building a silo application that doesn't have to integrate with anything, or you can start with brand new data sources. A little more difficult when you have to support multiple platforms. A little more difficult when you have legacy software that you have to integrate with or even fix. A little more difficult when you have legacy data you need to work with or even fix. So, or combinations thereof. So, anyways, this is one of the observations here, that we've got multiple factors or scaling factors, or complexity factors that we need to deal with. We have different roles on DAD teams. So first of all, like I said, we take away some of the marketing rhetoric. It's a team lead. It's not a Scrum Master. But because we're also looking at a wider, wider range of scope from a lifecycle point of view, as well as technology issues, we have more roles than what you see in, say, Scrum or in XP. So for example, because we deal with technical issues, we bring in the role of an architecture owner. We take a slightly more sophisticated approach. Instead of talking about just customers, we talk about stakeholders. We want to make it explicit that there's a wide range of stakeholders, not just end users and business managers. Some of these secondary roles, like independent tester and domain expert and integrator, they start to kick in at scale. So if you have say a 200-person team, chances are you've probably got 1 or 2 people that focuses just on managing the build, for example. They're an integration person. So anyways, these are sorts of observations that you can make when you start seeing teams at scale and you start looking at the big picture. So one of the aspects of DAD is that it's goal-driven. So when we first started developing this framework, we didn't want to have yet another prescriptive framework like Scrum, or rational process. That just didn't make any sense to us. Not as helpful. It's not very helpful to the industry. So what we wanted to do, and it was also based on empiricism. So we looked at what organizations were actually doing, and the organizations that were successful. And one of the things we noticed is that they were doing things, they were all working differently, but they were achieving the same sorts of process goals. So, for example, at the beginning of a project, everybody's got to put together a team. Everybody should, consider, figuring out what the initial scope of their effort is going to be. They should, consider what their technical strategy is going to be. They should get funding for the effort. They should probably do some risk management, or start by identifying their risks. And so, even though they were all doing these sorts of things, or most of these things, they were doing it different ways. So, there's many different ways you can explore scope. There's many different ways you can put your team together, for example. And as during construction, there's different ways you can improve quality. There's different ways you can address changing stakeholder needs. Not just a product backlog, by the way. So, that's one of the prescriptive elements of Scrum, but which is great. It's a great technique. Don't get me wrong. So anyways, and well, you can read this. So there's these different process goals that you need to achieve in some way. So these are the sorts of things we started observing, and what we wanted to do was help organizations make the process decisions that they were actually making. So, and it's interesting. So like I said, we didn't want to make, we wanted to learn from the past. So we didn't want to make the same sort of mistakes that got made with RUP or with Scrum. So it's interesting. So if you take a look at, say 10, 15 years ago when RUP was very popular, what happened here was, the RUP message was basically, here's this huge repository of great ideas, and they were great ideas. They're some of the best practices known at the time. And because you're smart, because you're process experts, you can tailor it down to something small that you actually need. And that didn't work. Most organizations didn't have the process expertise. They would look at RUP and they would, tailor it to a waterfall. Many people think that RUP is waterfall. It's just because of these mistakes, and it's certainly not true. But anyways, so mistakes got made, or they would adopt too much. They didn't have an overly complicated process. So then Scrum came along, and their message coming from the other, when you start, because you're process experts, because you own the process, if it's slightly better marketing rhetoric, you can tailor it up to something bigger that meets your needs. And the problem is we're seeing this fall apart too in the industry. Many teams are struggling with Scrum because they don't know they don't understand how it all fits together. They don't realize, what techniques they need other techniques they need to bring in to make Scrum work. So the problem is that both of these process methodologies or frameworks were problematic for the same reason. So, the RUP guy started with something big and assumed we're process experts and could tailor it to something small. The Scrum guys started with something very small and said, you could tailor it to something bigger because you're process experts. Well, the problem is you're not process experts. So if both those techniques fall apart, and both those strategies are really silly. Like, we've got to step back and think about this. Start with something big and do all this work to make it smaller, or start with something small and do all this work to make something bigger. Well, why not just start with something in the middle? Why not start with something where it's still lightweight, but the big idea, the big ideas have been thought through for you, and there's guidance for how to tailor that makes sense. So start with something in the middle. So this is what DAD's all about. Let's start in the middle, and let's stop fooling around with all this process stuff and get down to the actual work of delivering real value to our stakeholders. This makes a lot more sense to me. So how do you do this? So Disciplined Agile take what's called a goal-driven approach. So for example, I'm walking you through notation right now. And think of this as like a decision tree, or sort of like a mind map, I guess. But so there's different goals that a team might have to address, like exploring the initial scope, or addressing changing stakeholder needs, or putting the initial team together. Each of these goals have several issues, or several factors, several process factors you need to consider. So, for example, when you're putting the initial team together, where do you get people from? What's the source? How big is this team going to be? What type of structure will the team have? You know, what type of team members will be on it? You know, how distributed will this team be? Will it, you know, will you be co-located? Will you be working in cubicles? Will you be working from your houses? Will you be working across the globe? How are you going to support the team? And, you know, what's the availability of people? How dedicated are they to the team? Is everybody 100% of the team? Are some people only 50%? You know, what's their availability? So there's a bunch of issues you need to consider, a bunch of factors you need to consider. And then each one of these factors has multiple options for you. So, for example, when it comes to geographic distribution, your four most common ones are: is it co-located? Are you partially dispersed? Do you have some people working from home? Are you fully dispersed? Is the teams just, everybody in the team just in all completely different locations? Or do you have distributed subteams? Or combinations thereof? That's okay too. And then each of these options has advantages and disadvantages in certain situations where it makes sense to do them, and in certain situations where it doesn't make a lot of sense. So the point is, so let's step back from this for a second. So at a high level, it's fairly straight. So depending on what level of detail you want to go into, so at a high level, we've got this idea that you need to, you got to form the initial team. Okay, not exactly rocket science. Then we indicate, well, here's the things you need to think about. Here's these factors you need to consider. And then we say, so that might be the level of detail you want to go through in the process. And then finally, we also indicate, well, here's your options. If you don't know what your options are, here's what to consider, and here's the advantages and disadvantages that you're considering. So we guide you through these important process decisions, and because you're making these decisions anyway, so you're not, these teams, your team is making decisions like this all the time, but you don't realize it. You just blind. So Ken Schwaber tells you, oh well, go and have a product backlog, and you just do it. Does that make sense? I don't know. It might. For some situations, it does. In other situations, it doesn't. Do you know what trade-offs you're making? Because you're making trade-offs. So why not choose the techniques that make the most sense for you? So this is the idea here of, let's take some of the mystery out of this Agile stuff. Let's put people in position to do what makes sense for them, as opposed to what the self-proclaimed gurus are telling you to do. So here's an example of a goal. This is at the beginning of a project, you should secure funding. You should get some money to pay for your team. And there's different ways you can fund. So first of all, the two factors you should consider. First of all, how are you going to fund the project? Is it time and materials? Is it fixed cost? Stage gate? Other techniques. How are you going to get access to the money? Do you have to put in a formal request? Is it just informally you go to your manager and say, hey, we need some money for this project? Is there, just some sort of funding pool, so some management 3.0 type ideas? So there's different ways that you can access this money, this funding for your project. And there's trade-offs. So choose the ones that make most sense for you. Here's a slightly more complicated goal. This is, early in the project, you should align with the enterprise direction. What that means is make sure, be enterprise aware. You should make sure that what your team does reflects the overall goals and strategies of your organization. So you should be following common guidelines. There might be some templates that you can adopt. You have to coordinate with enterprise teams like the enterprise architects, portfolio management people. So yeah, you've got these interdependencies on these other teams, and you should leverage them and take advantage of them and make sure that, and there's stuff that you can reuse. So let's be smarter about the way that we work. Let's be more effective. Let's leverage the rest of the organization and thereby streamline what we're doing. So move away from this team focus to more of an organization or enterprise focus. So there's some advantages and disadvantages here. Early in the project, again, we might want to explore the initial scope. There's different levels of detail. You might not do any scoping at all. You might just start coding. Generally not a good idea, but some teams choose to do it. You might have a detailed requirement specification, big requirements up front. You might have some lightweight, index cards and whiteboard sketches. You might just be goal-driven. So you've got a sheet of 4 or 5, a piece of paper with 4 or 5 goals on it, and that's your entire scope document. And there's projects that work like this. There's different types of views you should consider. Usage modeling. So user stories are one type of a usage model. But you got user interface stuff to consider. You might have data stuff to consider, non-functional requirements. There's a bunch of views, a bunch of issues that you want to think about when you're doing the initial scope. There's different ways you can manage the work, when you manage the requirements, and so on. So the point is that, once again, we're making these choices explicit. The other thing I should have mentioned as well, the We have defaults because some people don't want to think. They just want to be told what to do, and that's okay. Some people are like that, or they don't want to be overwhelmed with all these choices. There's hundreds of choices. There's hundreds of these techniques you need to choose from, and the bolded text. So in the case of level of detail requirements envisioning, that's our suggested default. So if you don't want to make some coherent if you want to make some conscious choices of how you're going to work, then starting with a lightweight requirements artifact or whiteboard sketches, that's probably your best starting point, and then you figure it out from there. So when you do retrospectives throughout as you go, you can start doing process improvement by looking at these charts and saying, oh, here's other options that we might want to consider to address whatever things we're dealing with. So anyways, the point is you got choices, and Dad helps you understand these choices. It's just like perhaps your own father or your own dad. Good fathers give their children choices and help guide them. They provide some guidance, but they also let them make their own choices. And sometimes those choices aren't very good ones. But I'm a father, and I've learned the hard way that you really do need to let your children make choices and tell them what the trade-offs are, but then step back and let them do whatever choices. So in a way that the name Dad is might be appropriate for this framework. I've mentioned this several times. Disciplined Agile Delivery teams are enterprise aware, and what we mean by that is that we go one step further beyond what the usual Agile stuff is. So the Agile community has done some great work on becoming team aware and on promoting the idea that as a team we need to work together. As a team, we're gonna build this solution, but there's many teams in an organization. You need to work with these other groups. So minimally, you really need to be enterprise aware. How can I help my organization? How can I make things better here? And better yet, maybe even your community. So look beyond your organization and look beyond look to the overall environment. So anyways, there's more, and minimally you need to be enterprise aware. That's what we're promoting with Dad, is that let's start looking at the bigger picture here. As I said earlier, governance is baked right into Dad because, as I said, you are being governed, and many people think governance is a swear word and all this sort of stuff, and metrics are bad, all this. I just invite them to grow up. Anyways. So the point is that we are being governed. Let's do it effectively. So Dad, and there are some good governance strategies in Scrum and stuff like that, although they avoid the word governance usually, but let's make these strategies explicit. Let's give some guidance to senior management of how they can help our team as opposed to hinder them. Because my experience is, like I said earlier, senior managers are very smart people. They are trying to do the best they can. So let's give them better information. Let's give them better strategies for helping us. And the chances are pretty good they will. And if we don't step up to this, if we decide to, governance is a swear word, I don't want to do governance, I just want to program, then you really shouldn't complain if senior management is not doing what you want them to do. We should step up and help them figure out how to govern us. And the good thing is that Agile teams are easier to govern. So if you happen to be a senior manager thinking about going Agile, Agile should be very attractive to you. They're much easier to govern than traditional teams. So finally, just to wrap up here before I go to Q&A, so what does it mean to be disciplined? So without a doubt, Agile in general requires greater discipline than say traditional techniques. But we can go one step further. We can adopt the disciplines to learn continuously. We have some ideas that promote lean. To reduce the feedback cycle, also a lean concept. It takes discipline to deliver solutions, not just software, but solutions, and to do so incrementally. It takes discipline to be goal driven. I showed you a few of these goal charts, and yeah, it's a decision tree. They seem pretty straightforward, but actually having a discipline to take the time to make coherent choices and make yourself, choose techniques that are right for you. That does in fact require discipline. Streamlining the bookends, the inception and transition efforts. It's interesting now. A Forrester research group has got some pretty strong evidence showing that the majority of Scrum teams are actually doing something called water Scrum fall. And the idea is that they do this the team does this heavyweight inception. They do Scrum for construction, and they do heavyweight release. And I believe one of the reasons why this is occurring and is so prevalent is because Scrum does not give coherent advice for how do you do inception, how do you do transition. And as a result, organizations figure it out on their own. And unfortunately, they're falling back on their old habits. So my experience is that you need to give a full, full delivery life cycle advice, show how it all fits together. And even doing that, you still need the discipline to keep things as lightweight as possible. I'm working with an organization right now to do exactly that. And it can be a bit of a struggle. And then finally, adopting these agile governance strategies. We go into a fair bit of detail in the book on that one. Thank you for joining, and I hope I'm going to go to the chat window now. I've been flying blind, I guess. So I'm going to leave this slide up, and I'm going to go to the chat window, and we'll start taking a look at some of these things here. Okay, I'm going to kick out like that. And I should hopefully bring up the chat window now. I'm going to actually see if I can go back to this full slide. 1 second, please. Oh, it's not working. Okay, I'm going to, anyways, I got the chat window up. I don't know what you guys are seeing, but sorry about it if your screen's a mess now. So anyways, let's go. First of all, I'm going to pick some questions. Oh, and by the way, while I'm talking and while I'm answering the existing questions that are in chat, feel free to add more. Okay, that would be good. Okay, so anyways. Yeah, okay, so I guess Valentine will be one of the winners of the book, seeing as he put so many questions in. I'll try to answer a few of his points. So on the life cycle side of things, it is based on the standard life cycle. So as I said, the data is based on empirical observations. We're not making stuff here. This is just what we see out there and what we see works. So you're absolutely right. This is a standard way of work. These various life cycles I showed are standard ways of working that we've seen in many organizations. We're just being explicit about it. We're taking some of the, like I said, we're taking some of the mystery out of this agile stuff. As far as the phase thing, so Valentine also had another question about elaboration. No, there is no elaboration phase. There never will be. This was a very large discussion in IBM. There was a large number of former ruppers that definitely wanted an elaboration phase. I find that in practice, the elaboration phase proved to be phenomenally dysfunctional in most organizations. They would turn to an architecture phase. So it's interesting. The elaboration phase in RUP was fundamentally about proving the architecture, and so we kept that. So we have a milestone called prove the architecture. So we make it explicit in the milestone. So the first iteration or two, or sprint or two, if that's terminology is what you want to use, of construction is all about let's do the higher risk things first. Let's build a working end-to-end skeleton of the solution and prove that our architecture works. So we kept the value from the elaboration phase, which was proving the architecture, but we got rid of all the bureaucracy around that. So that's why that phase disappeared. So from Radu, is this not another reinterpretation of frog and octopus? Actually, yes. So the frog and the octopus framework from Philippe Kruchten who's also a strong, was involved with the rational input process for years, was developed in parallel to what was originally called the Agile scaling model that I led the development of in IBM. So this is parallel development, and Philippe and I have shared ideas over the years and bounced ideas around. So so it's not a reinterpretation. It was parallel development. Okay, so Valentine had some good points about the goals. Yeah, so I think the goals really do enable you to reuse ideas from other teams, to tailor your approach accordingly. So when you're so the scaling factors of team size and domain complexity and geographic distribution, those will motivate you to tailor your approach. So you'll make different choices in those decision trees, those goal diagrams, based on the scaling factors that your team faces. So that I think is the important thing. So different teams in different situations. So I think it's pretty obvious that a team facing great complexity will work differently than a team that is not. That a team that is of a team of 10 people work differently than a team of 30 people than a team of 200 people. So we need to reflect that in our approaches, and we need to choose wisely. So I think that's an important thing. There's from around this question, what is better not to use DAG? Good question. I think so if you're very, very new to Agile, that might be overwhelming to you. So you're going to need some experienced DAG coaches, hopefully somebody with some either at least a green belt, if not a black belt in Disciplined Agile Delivery. So anyways, yeah. So you need to be sophisticated, and you need to be able to observe that what situation that you're in. So I think that's a critical thing. So yeah. So and some people are really looking for simplistic stuff. Data obviously makes it clear that software development or software delivery or solution delivery is complex. And it is not a simple career that we've chosen for ourselves. Taurus rule 100. I don't know if that's right, but anyways, it's probably something like that. It's not clear how many rules does Dad have. We don't really have rules. We're not prescriptive. So Scrum is very prescriptive. It has 13 rules that thou shalt follow. That's prescription. Dad is not prescriptive. Now we make suggestions. We suggest you consider the full delivery life cycle. We suggest that you consider. Right now there's 22 delivery goals. We suggest that you at least consider them. So is a goal a rule? I don't know. I'm leery about the term rule. So anyways, so yeah, it's I think rule is a aspect of prescription. So I guess we've got one rule, and that rule is it depends. So if you want to call that a rule, more of a joke, I guess. But anyways, so from Alex, I'm just going to go order here. So sometimes, depending on the project, quite often user requests for bug fixes might come, which takes some time to resolve and can't be delayed until the next sprint iteration. What are the best practices for dealing with this? Well, that's interesting. So here is a classic. Alex, that's a great question. But here's a classic problem in this industry. There's this underlying assumption that you can't change the requirements during an iteration or sprint. So it's complete nonsense. Now that's one of the rules in Scrum, but in XP they have a completely different rule. They say that if you want to add new work into the current iteration, if you want to add 5 points for the stuff this iteration, you take 5 points out, so you can swap in and out. In that, I'm going to go back a few slides. I don't know how well this is going to. I think I'm going to go back a few slides. I don't know how well this is going to display. But if you take a look at, I'm going to go back in the full screen mode here for a second. So if you take a look at this life cycle coming in from the right, trying to move my chat window. I apologize for this. Okay, so coming in from the right, you see enhancement requests and defect reports coming in. So as Alex said, large number of teams, this is the reality that what's really going on here is that you're working on the new release of something that's already up and running in production. And as a result, and this is true for, I think, about 75 or 80% of Agile teams. And I've actually got solid numbers on this. I just off the top of my head, I don't know what it is. But So this is for the vast majority of teams, they've got to deal with this. So we explicitly show in the life cycles themselves that we're getting work coming in from production, from the operations or support people, and that it should be prioritized and put on the stack and dealt with accordingly. And if the approach to do that is to do it during the current iteration, then so be it. This is, like I said, this is the reality of the vast majority of teams. So we build this right in. We also give you options, right? So I don't have the goal chart with me, but in the address changing stakeholder needs goal diagram, we explicitly talk about this very issue of do you accept this change in the middle of a sprint or do you not, or in the middle of an iteration or do you not? So this is one of the process decisions that you've got to make. In Scrum, they prescribe no, don't do that. In XP, they prescribe yes, do that. Well, obviously there's a choice there, and so in DAD, we don't prescribe things. We tell you what your options are. We suggest you consider making this choice because you're going to do it anyways, right? Your team will make a decision of how it's going to work. Why not do so? Understand the trade-offs that you're doing. Why not do so intelligently? So, anyways, from Everett, there was, can you address when and why you might integrate extreme programming into DAD? So yeah, practices from extreme programming like pair programming and continuous integration and test-driven development and many others are built right into DAD. Now, if I'd gone into some of the construction-oriented goal diagrams, you would have seen all these techniques being called out. And once again, if you go into details and behind all that, then the advantages and disadvantages of each, and then suggestions of when to do it. So what happens, so we view, when we start putting DAD together, we view these various methodologies or process frameworks, what we're going to call them, as sources of practices, sources of ideas or techniques, and that we could leverage in the DAD framework, because we didn't want to reinvent the wheel, right? There's a lot of great material out there. Let's take advantage of it. So anyways, and extreme programming was a great source of, obviously, I think, is a great source of ideas. So we adopted those ideas and walk you through how to make those choices. Okay, as far as downloading the presentation, it will be available from the LTS site. The Luxoft site will make that a little more obvious right towards the end. From Alexi, does the team lead role replace the Scrum Master role? Yes, it does. So it's a slightly more sophisticated role than we see in Scrum Master because DAD looks at the bigger picture, so you end up with a few more responsibilities in the leadership role. And as I said, also we're trying to take some of the marketing rhetoric or the branding or the marketing branding out of the methodology. Scrum Master is very obviously a marketing term. It's not a anyways. But if you like the term Scrum Master, then hey, go for it. Use whatever terminology you want. Just realize that it's a marketing thing. From Cosmin, sometimes depending on the project. Oh, okay, same sort of question I saw earlier. Was there one single? Okay, from Michael. Was there one single project during the course of which you realized it was high time to look for a brand new approach to ship quality software? I don't really understand the question. Maybe, Michael, if you could expand on that in chat again. Is the question around why did we create yet another methodology? If that's the question, the answer is because we observed, it was an issue of waste in the industry. We observed a lot of organizations spending a lot of effort figuring this stuff out. Because the other methods really weren't giving people good advice of how to tailor the approach for enterprise class organizations. They were, the effort, the advice basically boils down to, well, you own the process. Your teams are smart. You can figure it out on your own. Yeah, you can figure it out on your own, but it takes a long time. It's expensive. And if you don't really know what you're doing, you're going to make a lot of mistakes along the way, and that's really wasteful. And I think there's something better. So that is, like I said earlier, we don't need. We've really got to move away from these extremes, right? So RUP was one extreme, this big, huge thing and tailor it down. And Scrum is this very small thing and tailor it up. Well, I hope you can see how it makes a lot more sense just to start in the middle. But anyways, think about it. But I think we can do a lot better. I really do think that that there's opportunity to be more effective as developers, and one of them is to stop wasting so much time figuring out this process stuff and start reusing advice from elsewhere. So there's a lot of reinvention of the wheel in this industry. There's a lot of in the process side of things. So I think we can. So anyways, I think I'll take one or two more questions, and I think the rest I'll have to either answer by email. So how do you motivate developers to care about enterprise, or at least about architecture of the project? Is there a special approach in DAD? The approach we take is we do believe the team should own the process, that the team needs to how they're going to work together. But we make it explicit. We make architecture explicit. We make it explicit that you need to work with the rest of the enterprise. And if you choose not to, then that's your choice, right? It's like I said, a good father, a good parent gives their children choices, and gives them options, and then lets them make their own choices. Let them and sometimes people make bad choices. So and then you as a good father, you help pick the child up and help them get going again. So I think this is what we're trying to do in the DAD process framework. We try to educate you on what your trade-offs are that you're making, and if you choose not, it's your choice. Well, at some point in the future, you realize, oh, yeah, should be doing this. Oh, okay. Question: booking prescriptions. Have you observed how team performs restrictive data? Is easier without code? I think is your DOL. It's almost trivial, and it's prescriptive. It tells you here's the 13 rules, or whatever that number was. Here's the way you do things. And don't do Scrum, but all sorts of stuff. So that's pretty easy to adopt. Just do what you're told. DAD is a little more sophisticated. We say, here's your choices, here's your options, here's how it all fits together. You choose what's right for you. So it's like, in a way, it's like going into a grocery store. You need to buy vegetables, and you need to buy fruit and canned goods and milk and other things like that. Well, if I go into a small store and they've only got apples, and they've only got rutabagas, and they've only got macaroni, and they've only got one type of milk, well, choosing my vegetables and fruit and milk for the week is pretty straightforward. If I go into a supermarket and there's 300 vegetable choices and 400 different types of fruit and whatever else, then suddenly I got to think. And do I want bananas or do I want apples? Do I want oranges? How many do I want? I got to start making those sorts of decisions. So so it's easier just going in, grabbing the one choice that you've got, and then moving on and be happy with that rutabaga for the week, or having to choose from 50 different types of vegetables. Depends. I think you're going to end up with a much better solution in the long run by having choices, but it's just it takes a little more work to have a better environment. So, anyways, thank you very much. I guess we should wrap this up now. I'm at the top of the hour.
Thank you, Scott.
And
sorry.
No problem.
Thank you once again for the great webinar. Thank you, everyone, for joining. And before we all leave, Scott, I wanted to ask you to choose the top 5 questions so that we could basically select the new lucky owners of your latest book.
Okay, let me, sorry about that. I'm just going to bring up, okay. I closed the chat window.
Oh.
Hang on here. Okay, I'm bringing up the chat window again. Okay. Okay. Oh, I guess I was going through all the private messages. I am sorry about that. Okay. The 5 best questions I saw. Well, definitely Valentine. Valentine Tudor Mocano. I liked Alex Solive's question. Radu Davidescu. I apologize for my pronunciations. Cosmin Hatlaginu. I'm not even Cosmin. And is that how many? How many is that? Is that 3 or
4?
4? Okay.
I have 4.
And Artem Baranov.
Perfect. Thank you so much. So,
Okay.
Congratulations, guys. Now you're lucky owners of the book. We will contact you with your email addresses after the webinar to basically get the information where we should send these books. And basically, I wanted to mention that the record of this webinar, as well as these slides that Scott has just shown to you, will be available at luxoft.com/LTS. So you would definitely have a chance to watch it once again. And now we also have a little survey, little opinion poll for you. So it would be really great if you could fill that in so that we know what we should improve for the next time. Thank you so much and have a great day. Join LTS and stay tuned.